Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Fighter and Attacker, a classic 90s arcade shoot 'em up. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Namco, Fighter and Attacker, or FA as it was known in Japan, released to arcades in 1992. Jump to May of 2024, and it's available as an arcade archive title from Hamster for the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Switch, though at the time of this recording, it's only available on the Japanese shops for those systems. I'm not sure why, however, I would assume a worldwide release is coming relatively soon. This is a fairly straightforward vertical scroller that doesn't do a lot to set itself apart from the other titles that were released in the era, though there are a couple points that I do quite like about it. So it has a rather unique electronic dance music soundtrack, and that really does set it apart, but you also have a great selection of real-world aircraft to choose for your player fighter. With all that said, this is a title I do think is interesting, and there are some really strong points for it being just a good straight-up score attack, so if you like that era of arcade shoot-em-ups, this is worth your time to check out. However, let's dive in and you can see whether or not this is one that you would like. So here we find ourselves at the title screen with credits entered in. You can play this game one-player or two-player co-op, and so we'll be showing this game up as a co-op experience. Starting the game, you're taken to your aircraft selection. As you can see, there's a lot of options here. So you have different shot types as well as different ground attacks. So basically each ship has an anti-air and an anti-ground shot. And in each subcategory, you've got one of each type of anti-ground. So there's a lot of great selection here with all these different real-world fighters available. So for our purposes today, we'll be showing off with the game with the F-22A as well as the Mirage 2000. As far as vertical scrollers are concerned, the scrolling for this game is relatively nice and straightforward. In a two-player experience, one thing that I can really appreciate about this one is the way that the scrolling is. Even though we're scrolling vertically and there's a little bit of horizontal movement, even if one player scrolls the screen left or right, it's not pulling the other player like occasionally happens in some vertical scrollers. As far as our attacks are concerned, so you have your anti-air attack and you have your ground attack. In the standard arcade setup, these are bound to different buttons with no rapid fire. However, in the Arcade Archives release, we do have them bound to a single button, the right trigger, and of course you can engage you can engage rapid fire should you desire. So for the two fighters we picked, the F-22 has a lock-on mechanic that, there's some flashing that will be occurring throughout the course of the game, so do keep in mind if you're photosensitive. As far as the anti-ground, there are three different types. So the F-22 has a lock-on mechanic where you'll see a cursor lock onto enemies and then you'll fire missiles at that target. They're also, like the Mirage, will use drop ground bombs, which will deal damage to enemies within the range of the reticule in front of the fighter itself. And lastly, there's a third type. There's also a ground Vulcan, so basically like a massive anti-ground cannon that you'll be firing at the enemies. That's a short range and appears as an indicator in front of your ship. So as far as from a co-op experience, I feel it's actually a really great benefit to having two different types available. You have some extra coverage and support that way, so that's part of the reason we're using this particular configuration to show off the gameplay. In addition, one of the things that is nice, as I was mentioning the scrolling earlier, one thing that's nice about the way the scrolling works is it's possible if you were to be traversing a section where you don't want to scroll enemies on from the other side of the screen, one thing you could potentially do is have one player basically hold down the screen from one side and lock down the enemies that way. Should you run out of lives, which count as armor at the bottom, when you take hits, you lose an armor point. Should you run out of those, then when you continue, that's the only point that we get any kind of screen clearing bomb. You have that carpet bomb animation that scrolls up the stage, and a fair bit of damage is done to the enemies on the screen. If there are some stronger enemies, though, they will survive that, so do keep that in mind. So we find ourselves encountering our first boss. So across the 8 stages this game has, there's a boss or a target at the end of each stage. It is possible to simply fly past this target, not destroying it, and those are tallied at the end of the game if you complete all 8 stages for some bonus points and, well, just a little bit of swag as well. It is definitely easy to miss defeating some of the stage bosses, as you would just fly past them quickly enough. Stage 4 definitely comes to mind with that one. As far as this fight is concerned, so you have a lot of individual turrets, but once we get to this point in the stage, we can focus on the ship's bridge, and once that's destroyed, the rest of the ship will explode, and that'll be it. Had we not destroyed the bridge, we would have continued to sail past the ship, and it would have been a failed mission. Once you complete the stage, all the various help guys you ended up picking up throughout the stage are counted up as 2,000 points each for bonus points, thus helping build up a good score. And that is Fighter and Attacker served up for your enjoyment. As far as from minus flavor concerns, the couple biggest hits I would give this game, the first one is graphically, it's relatively bland. A lot of the stages come across as shades of brown that don't really stand out in any great way. So even if I feel the gameplay is great, from a graphical standpoint, this is not a title that delivers all that well. Then there's also the problem, there's no power-up system. So this is kind of a double-edged sword. You never get stronger, but at the same point, you're never weaker. So it makes the game fair, but at some points later in the game, it would have been nice if there was some way to power up or deal with the greater amounts of enemies you encounter at that point. It's helpful to be playing it co-op, as it does a co-op partner definitely makes the crowd control much easier to deal with. But on the plus flavor side, so I really do like the game's unique soundtrack and some of the style as well. Like when you add a credit into the machine, for example, you get that sound clip, which is kind of fun. And it's not the kind of soundtrack you would expect for this kind of title, so it does help set it apart at least a little bit. And then you have all those different aircraft that you can choose from. Yes, most of them are like, it's just picking a different kind of shot, a different speed, and maybe like a different bomb type, but having those options does make it a lot of fun if you happen to like some of those planes, like the F-22 or the Mirage, like all those various options. And lastly, one of the things that I think really made this game for me is I just feel like even though, especially later on in the game, the difficulty starts to ramp up, it always feels fair. Like you can find ways to dodge past the enemy shots most of the time, and there's not anything that's going to go and be just crazy. So if you're looking for a solid score attacker, then without much in the way like multipliers or those kind of systems from the early 90s, I feel like this one is a great one to try. And with that, we find ourselves at the end of this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. Fighter and Attacker FA, definitely one enjoyed by the chef. Alright, we want to thank you so much for joining us for this week's video. As always, we hope you have a wonderful week, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.